Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another round of sound. This is the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. I'm Bob Pompeani. Got a lot to get into tonight, including Mike Tomlin comments down at the owners' meeting. We'll get into that. We'll also talk about March Madness down to the Final Four, but the #1 topic tonight on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown is going to be the Pittsburgh Pirates. Here to talk about it is Jeff Hathhorn, sports director 93.7 The Fan, Brian Batko.
I brought my torpedo bat for tonight.
We're going to talk about the torpedo bat. Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News, who's been busy with the Final Four and all the basketball talk. So let's get right into it, starting with the Pirates here. And Jeff, 3 out of 4, it's only 4 games. They play 162, I know. Last year they started with a sweep of the Marlins in Miami and led to a 9-2 start. 3 walk-off losses, offense non-existent, bullpen not good, fundamental base running. What else could have gone wrong?
Yeah, it wasn't great, but I would say it's 4 games. Remember last year, everybody at the end of the first week, the end of April, hey, this team's going to
2 years ago, they were 20-8.
Look out, when Skeens comes, this team's going to go to the playoffs, and then it just, so maybe they're going to go the other way this time. Now, I will say that to me, it shows the lack of an impact bat because every team makes mistakes. You'll see it in other games. It's just they have players that can make up for those mistakes. Pirates don't.
It's only 4 games, so I guess in football terms, it would kind of equate to like the first throw of a quarterback in a game. But in this case, it's sailed 12 rows into the stands, and you're like, it's okay, you might get better. But no, I mean, yeah, they have very little margin for error when you don't have those big bats like Jeff's talking about. And I think a team like the Pirates, the way you're constructed to try to compete is, okay, we're not going to go out and spend on a 40-plus homer hitter, but we can buy guys that play good defense, make the right moves on the base paths, help us win on the margins.
Right?
Exactly. Try to manufacture runs. And so far, not so good for a coaching staff that, what was spring training for if 4 games in you're making these mistakes already?
Well, I don't know what happened this weekend that is any surprise to anyone, really. This is the way everyone in baseball anticipated the season would go for the Pirates. And I'm wondering, what's the direction? This is a management group that's now been in place 5-6 years. You got rid of the guy that got to 96 wins and got you into the playoffs a couple of times because you didn't feel you were going in the right direction. So what's the direction here? It just seems to be stagnant. Okay, you got Skeens, but what did you do to build around him this offseason, the first offseason after he tore the league apart with his arm? It's a real disappointment.
Plus, it's year 6 of this regime, and you can argue this is probably the worst roster that I've seen in this regime. Jeff, I want to ask you about
It's funny you say that, Bob, because Charrington said this is his best team.
He said that today?
He said that today.
No.
And the reason he said that is the veterans. He says he goes in that room, the guys after a tough loss, they were talking about moving forward, about all the right things to do, and he thinks he has a good group of veterans that are going to help this young team.
Well, Emmanuel Valdez could be 22 or 32. I couldn't tell you because I don't even know who Emmanuel Valdez is, and he was in the lineup today.
Yeah, that lineup today was not very good. My point was, you know, they went and stole a lot of bases in this. Now, normally when you get on base, as much as they did, and steal bases, you think they're going to be a lot of runs. They went 8 for 40 with runners in scoring position. That underlies what you guys talked about, no bats. You got to come up with clutch hits if you're going to play, and it doesn't even require home runs, just a hit.
I mean, that's a credit to the Pirates because they realize that they don't have big bats, so they're going to have to find ways to manufacture runs. So they stole a lot of bases, and they did it. I mean, they taught it well because Joey Bart's even stealing a base. So that tells you that they're doing something right in that regard, but eventually they're just going to have guys step off offensively, and I don't know if they have many in that lineup that can do that on a consistent basis.
Well, they taught the base stealing part of the book well, but I guess G1 Bay has not gotten to the next chapter of the book.
Here's a guy fighting for a spot, right?
You can't get thrown out of third base, especially in a 2-2 game to end the 8th inning. You just can't do that, Mike, and that's what they do. These are base running issues, and they had a lot of other fundamental misplays.
The misplays in the outfield by Cruz are another problem. It's just you've got to see some sort of direction. And I have not seen any forward movement since I returned to town.
All right, I'm going to preface this by saying it's 4 games, Jeff. I'm going to say this again. However, this is a trend that's happened in Major League Baseball. There is your starters only go a limited amount. The starters were good in this series. They gave up just a couple of runs, 2.42 collective ERA in 4 starts. The bullpen, ineffective. Okay, but when you only go 5 innings every day and then you get a 13-inning game, you're going to have tired arms, you're going to have ineffective play to begin with, and overusage. these pitchers have got to go further into the game, don't you think?
Well, it's not atypical this time of year that pitchers are.
I understand, but I think this will
Right.
carry on. You're going to see them make changes 6th, 7th inning because that's the way Derek Shelton's done
Maybe.
it.
I mean, you'd hope that it won't be that way. You hope that it's going to be able to be stretched. I mean, we've seen Keller have a complete game. I don't think Skeens is a complete game guy in today's age because, unlike Nolan Ryan, he's not going to be allowed to throw 155 pitches to get that complete game because of all the swing and miss. You know that going in. Unfortunately, David Bednar is really struggling.
Yeah.
And when your back end is struggling, 3 walk-off losses.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I hear your point, Bob, but I mean, the David Bednar woes are getting yikes. I mean, and he and Derek Shelton are maybe more tied at the hip at this point than any other player with the manager because of how he's stuck by him at times and really tried to defend him. But I mean, that's going to be the spotlight's going to be on both of those guys as this continues and if he doesn't get out of this rut.
Wasn't that more or less the decisive element of last season when they were still competitive? Bednar came in and just kept throwing gas on the fire. And if you don't fix that, either by changing it up or getting him right, I'm not sure how much you can anticipate being successful with starters who are only going 6 innings.
And, Mike, I understand you kind of do him a solid because he's been an all-star twice. Like, give him the first opportunity. But I don't know if 4 games is enough or 3 in his case. But I'm going to start looking at Santana and other guys in those situations.
Holderman's also struggling, too. Real quick, I have a minute left on this one. Mike, I'm going to go to you. Torpedo bats. Again, this is something that's come up because the Yankees hit 15 home runs in 3 days, 9 yesterday. So they have this MIT physicist who's now one of their coaches. He's developed a barrel of the bat that sweet spot, bigger. And then Major League Baseball says there's nothing wrong with this. I remember when corking, pine tar, all these things. I don't know what it says in the rule book about bats. I tried to find today. I couldn't find it. What's your take on this? Are they just doing something ahead of everyone else?
Well, I'm astounded that there wasn't anything to cover this. They're so particular about so many elements about the equipment in the game, as most sports that have extensive equipment are, like golf, for instance. I'm stunned that they don't have anything to cover this. But if they don't, then it's just being smarter than everybody else. And how did the other 20-some teams not think of it, and only the Yankees? I mean, like MIT's been there for like 100 years, so it's not like no one could have thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as if the legislative body of Major League Baseball is, not cracking down on this or allowing it, then I certainly have no issue with it. And hey, I would think the person in the world who is most likely to figure out a way to hack the system with bats would be working for the New York Yankees or the Dodgers or one of those teams.
Damn Costanza, he finds all those people. Listen, if it's the Yankees or Dodgers or something, why couldn't it have been a small market team that could have figured that out?
You would think they would.
The Pirates have all these people and these analytics. Like, why couldn't they have been the ones to figure that out?
What about the Red Sox? MIT is in Boston. How did they miss it?
Well, now he's a physicist turned coach. We'll find out. When we come back, we're going to talk about Mike Tomlin, the Steelers down at the owners' meetings, and some of the comments he made today regarding Aaron Rodgers. That's coming up next, right here on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. All right, still nothing on Aaron Rodgers. Apparently there's no timeline. Mike Tomlin down at the owners' meeting had a lot to say about where this situation is. Brian Batko, Jerry Dulac was down there and basically says, Tomlin says there's no timeline, nor does he expect one. He also was asked, does he expect this to be done by the draft? And he said, I haven't crossed my mind. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah,
what it is?
The Tomlin, I hadn't really given that much thought. Okay, Mike, sure. You haven't thought about whether who your starting quarterback is going to be, or whether it's going to be a future Hall of Famer who beat you the last time you made it to the Super Bowl by the time the draft rolls around. I pretty much could have scripted his question and answer today for you, just knowing how he handles these issues. I mean, 18 years in, if he's good at anything, it's sidestepping and definitely dealing with these tough questions. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really give off any vibe other than what I think a lot of people have on the outside, which is they are letting 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, whose team went 5-12 last year at the Jets, essentially dictate their offseason and the way this season's going to go, and I think it's a bad look for them.
I am baffled by their level of interest in Aaron Rodgers. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. We saw him last year against the Steelers, didn't seem a threat at all, and you add in the culture aspect of it. I was watching the documentary that he did when I was working out the other day. And right there, you can see, like, all the way back to when he had gotten to Cal, he's already telling Marshawn Lynch, oh, don't worry about the coaches. Don't listen to them. I got it. I mean, he's in college, first year, and he's doing that. That's the kind of player he's been. And you've got you've got a quarterback in Russell Wilson that you made handoff 11 consecutive times in the Bengals game after he'd hit them for 45 points the first time around. Do you think Aaron Rodgers is going to do that? Do you really think he'll hand it off 11 times in a row and say, sure, coach, I got your back?
No.
Yeah, I don't get why they would. Next couple of weeks, I get it. There's nothing much going on right now except for pre-draft stuff. I would want to know going into the draft, or if it's really okay for Tomlin not to know going into the draft, then quarterback isn't going to be high on their radar.
Right.
That's signaling to you that they're going to go defensive line, wide receiver, corner, or something else in the first round, and maybe even in the third round, because they're just going to wait on Aaron Rodgers. I don't buy, though, that they would wait until training camp.
Yeah, I mean, guys like Joe Flacco and Carson Wentz are probably going to be sitting out there on the open market until after the draft. So there are contingency plans that you can have there if you're the Steelers. But I'm kind of with you there, Jeff, that I think at the line of demarcation, as Tomlin put it, I'm pretty surprised that he would view that legitimately as the start of training camp versus the start of mandatory mini camp, which is literally mandatory, part of the offseason.
Yeah.
I would think you would want him there learning the offense, getting to know the supporting cast around him. And yes, could Aaron Rodgers figure it out this long into the league? He probably could pick up Arthur Smith's playbook and, hit the ground running in Latrobe. But what is the message that it would send to the other guys on this team that, hey, we're bringing in this mercenary essentially. He'll be with you from July 24th till we hope February 14th, and that's about it.
All right, Mike, let me ask you this. If they don't know, and if they really truly don't know, right, it goes to the draft. Should the Steelers take a quarterback in the first round when they have so many other needs?
Not with these quarterbacks. There's been no indication that any of them is capable enough to change a franchise's future. They made that mistake when they took Kenny Pickett. And I said it at the time that they would regret it for years. Well, here we are, years later, and they still haven't figured out that position. So absolutely don't make that mistake again. Go and get a quarterback when apparently, according to the draft analysts, next year's class is much better than this year's. We've seen the guys that are in that class play plenty, and some of them were very good college quarterbacks, but there wasn't anybody who said, take me, I'm a future star.
You know how one of the tropes that year of people when they would just talk about the Steelers making that choice was, well, would they still pick him if he was Kenny Pickett, the Mississippi quarterback, instead of the Pickett? Well, we're about to find out because Jackson Dart, I think, profile is pretty similar to Pickett in a lot of ways.
But he should be gone. Right, Jeff? I mean, I'm looking at some of these mock drafts. They have him going in the top 10 now.
There's so much misinformation out there from teams, from agents, trying to throw people off to where they really want to go. So I don't know if I buy a lot of this. If he's there and he's a stretch, why are you even thinking about it? You've got a lot of other needs to fill.
Right. No second-round pick either.
If you think that he's the guy, go for it. But many people would say that he's not.
And if it's not, then all of a sudden you'll be doing this again and again and again. And that's the problem you have. You turn it into the Indy Colts. They don't want to do that. We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Final Four, which is all top seeds. We'll talk about it when we come back right here on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. All right, we're down to the Final Four in March Madness. And to no one's surprise, I suppose, all 4 #1 seeds are there. Mike DeCourcy, Sporting News, this is your bread and butter. You've spent a lot of time doing this. What does this signify more than anything else, that all 4, normally you get one of them knocked out, you get a Cinderella story that takes you into the, Elite 8. We haven't seen any of that in this year's tournament.
Yeah, this has only happened once before since they went to 64 teams in 1985. That was in 2008. So it signifies that maybe these teams are even better than we thought. And if you look at it, I mean, Auburn had so many quad 1 wins throughout the course of the year, the best regular season anybody had. Duke dominated the ACC in a way that no one ever has. Then Houston goes basically 19-1, 22-1 if you want to throw in the league tournament as well. So all these teams have dominated their leagues to some degree. So maybe it shouldn't be a surprise to us that these 4 are there. I had Duke and Florida both there. I thought Auburn was wobbling a little bit at the end. Mm-hmm. In the end, I thought that I mentioned the possibility that they were bored with the end of the regular season, and I think that was right. Once they got to the tournament, they were Auburn again.
I'm still surprised that all 4 have made it. I mean, you dropped the stat there, and Mike's the expert on this, the paid professional. I watch college basketball from a fan standpoint, but I mean, I don't necessarily know that there's any sweeping conclusions to be made because you look at some of the results that led us here. Purdue could have beaten Houston the other night in the Sweet 16 game. UConn had Florida on the rope. So these teams found ways to win to get there. And I think a lot of people, too, are going to be asking sort of, is this good for college basketball? Do you like that it's the 4 number 1 seeds? Me, sort of, yes, but I'd kind of like to see one underdog in there, one kind of, chippy Cinderella that you could get behind next weekend.
I don't know how many we're going to see going forward with NIL, but that's probably a conversation for another day with a lot more time. I'm with you, Mike. I thought Auburn was a little bit off. I thought Michigan State would get through. But to me, what it shows is really good defense still wins. I mean, Duke has Cooper Flagg, but their defense is outstanding. Houston gets after you. Auburn played really good defense today. I mean, and Florida can do a little bit of everything. They're probably the 4th best defensive team. They can get after you offensively. Defense and length can be such a big factor, and that's why we're seeing those teams.
Okay, I know this for another day, what you just said, the NIL, but I have to ask, we have 1 minute left. So we saw Robert Morris do this thing, and all of a sudden, pretty much their whole team is going to go and transfer. Mike, where is this headed, and does it feed into the top-notch teams always getting what they want?
Well, I think one of the things that has to happen is that teams like Robert Morris or other mid-majors have to start to look to higher levels to see about players that aren't playing at those levels and try to bring them to their level and use whatever NIL resources they have to get those players. I think that's something that we really haven't seen happen a lot since we started the NIL era, and I think that's going to happen, and I think it can happen. There are programs in the MAC or the Metro Atlantic or places like that have resources. They just have to know how to expend them, and I don't think they've done a great job of that to this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's capitalism in college basketball. I mean, what's the answer? Do you subsidize these low to mid-major teams in some way, buyouts in players' NIL contracts? That's tricky. It's tough for teams like RMU. Until
their contracts, I mean, there's not much you can really do. And I think one of the cool things, I mean, 2 of the key players for Robert Morris this year were Division II players. So it's awesome for those guys to get an opportunity. And, you can pick at that level. You can find a couple of players.
Shout out Gannon.
It's just like the thing I feel for coaches now is recruiting is 365 days a year.
And it's not always best to go into the high schools. It's just
retention, too.
Go to the transfer portal every year and come up with a team. And I think Jeff Capel, to some degree, is going to have to do that as well. We got to take a break. When we come back, Ovechkin, Crosby. One's already closed on a Gretzky record. The other is about to do so, it looks like. We'll talk about it next. All right, Sidney Crosby this week ended a Gretzky record, which is 1 point per game, at least in 20 consecutive seasons, which is remarkable. And he was on display again today, slowing down not one bit over his 20 years in this game. And now it looks like Alex Ovechkin is going to do the same thing, Jeff. He's 5 away, scored again. So he's 5 away from doing it. It could happen on the final game of the season. It's pretty remarkable that 2 of these 2 longstanding records I thought would stand for a longer time.
How many more games do we have to watch these 2 play? Enjoy every moment of it. And it was so cool what Ovechkin did with making his team come out and shake Fleury's hand as a recognition of those rivalry games. Because, Fleury made some big stops. Ovechkin also scored more against Fleury than anybody else, but he wanted it to say this was a special era, and it really was, and we still have a few remnants of that era still around.
Yeah, it keeps the casual fans a little bit more involved, too. I think when names that you know from yesteryear are still making these plays, still chasing these records, I think you'll see people kind of tuned in to see, all right, is Ovechkin going to go out and get this thing within the next 2 or 3 games, or is this going to drag on for a while if he can't get off the schneid? But, yeah, obviously still playing at a very high level, and we'll see where and when he breaks it.
I can't believe 2010 is yesteryear, but I think he's right. It is. That was the height, really, right around 2009, 2010. And of course, it carried on all the way through 2018, this unbelievable rivalry between the 2 players and the 2 teams. And it is something that was really special to be a part of as someone who watched it and followed it. And I'm sure for the players and the management, I'm sure it was extraordinary to be a part of that. Those 2 players, 2 of the greatest of all time on the same teams for their entire careers that were rivals. I mean, how lucky could we be to be a part of that?
Imagine the scene if Ovechkin breaks it in D.C., too. I mean, Penguins fans might not want Caps fans to get that moment, but that'll be pretty special.
How about if it happens here in Pittsburgh? Do you want to see it happen here in Pittsburgh? Because I would stand up and applaud.
If it happens within the realm of a regular game.
All right, so let's say the Penguins are down 1. They pull their goaltender. He needs to do 1 goal. I don't
that's
think
fine.
it matters.
That's
He
within
can
the
score.
realm of the game.
But I've had
Penguins are
some
trying
people
to
tell
win.
me that if I'm Sullivan, I'm not pulling the goaltend at that point. I don't
No,
want him
play
to
the game to
That's
win.
what I say. Play the game to win. What do you
No Strahan Favre moment
Strahan.
for Ovechkin. I mean, that sack is
The
still
assist from Crosby.
that sack is still controversial.
It is.
Decades later. So
And I'll tell you, Gastineau's still
I know.
mad about his
It's
situation.
He is. I
sad.
heard, I heard him talk about that. Yeah, I agree. Play to win the game if that's what your situation is, because lots of each of their goals have been empty netters. So if it happens to come on that, it might not be quite as exciting, but it's still extraordinary.
It is, and it may come down to April 17th. And if you have a ticket, protect it for now, or you may want to sell it too. Who knows? Anyway, number 1 Cochran Ford, they know, and they've just added a 5th store. And to celebrate the new number 1 Cochran Ford Youngstown, all of their Western Pennsylvania locations have Ford Fab 5 grand opening savings. You can pick any one of their 3 different $500 offers when you buy or lease a new Ford. It's as simple as that. Plus, enjoy 5 times the selection with more than 950 models available. Learn more at Cochran.com or visit number 1 Cochran Ford, Monroeville, Allegheny Valley, or Butler County. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. We have time for one final thing, and that would be, gentlemen, I want to know how you think Aaron Rodgers' situation will play out.
Soon. I think he's
Does he
gonna
end up here?
I think he's going to end up signing with the Steelers, and if he wins, no one will care about any of this stuff right now.
I'll just say before the draft, yes, I think he ends up here. Those two kind of need each other at this point, but who knows? It's Aaron Rodgers.
I'm going to hold out hope that he decides that he's done with football and he wants to go chase greener pastures somewhere
Or a
else.
dark place somewhere.
You've watched the documentary,
Dark place,
so yeah.
absolutely. That's what I'm hopeful for. We'll see how it goes.
Mike, Brian, Jeff, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. We'll do it again next Sunday night, as always, right here on the number 1 Cochran Sports Showdown. Have a good week.